Journal. Wir lesen Rich Dad Poor Dad auf Englisch. Ähm, 15 minutes timer on the clock. The lesson: a picture is worth a thousand words. Take a look at the chart of 120 years of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and you will see why and how savers become losers. The chart shows there are the chart shows there are have been there there are there they are. The chart shows there are the chart shows there are have been three massive stock market crashes in the first 10 years of this new century. The chart below industrial the chart below illustrates the chart below illustrates the ch so, Uhrzeit wir müssen Wort lernen. Übersetzer. Google Übersetzer. Illusion. What? Illustrates, oder?
Illustrates.
Veranschaulicht. Okay. The chart below illustrates these three crashes: 120 years. Hoch, unter, hoch, unter, unter, nach hoch. The first crash was the dot-com. The first crash was the dot-com crash around the year 2000. The second and the third crashes were the real estate crash of 2007, followed by the banking crash of 2008. Lesen ist noch for the easy people, bro. Ihr müsst euch vorstellen, das Buch habe ich schon seit 6 Jahren nie gelesen. The Giant Crash of 1929. When you compare the first three crashes of the 21st century to the giant crash of 1929, you gain a perspective of how truly giant the first three crashes of the century were. The giant crash. Printing money. The chart below shows that after each crash, the US government and the Federal Reserve Bank began printing money. Biggest money printing of all time. Fed expansion of monetary base. Saving the rich. Between the years 2000 and 2016, in the name of saving the economy, the banks of the world kept cutting interest rates and printing money. While our leaders want us to believe they were saving the world, in reality, the rich were saving themselves and through the poor and middle class under the bus. Today, interest rates in many countries are below zero, which is why savers and losers. Today, today interest rates today interest rates in many countries are below zero, which is why savers are losers. Today, the biggest losers are the poor and middle class, the people who work for money and save money. Das heißt, die Leute, die für Geld arbeiten und Geld sparen, sind entweder arm oder Mittelklasse. Jetzt verstehe ich, was er meint mit reiche Leute arbeiten nicht für deren Geld. Das Geld arbeitet für die. Auch eine Lektion, sein Geld nicht zu sparen. Lieber investieren, aber in was? Rich Dad Lessons. Your house is not an asset. Rich Dad Lesson. Your house is not an asset. 20 years ago in 1997, every publisher who sent me a rejection slip criticized Rich Dad's lesson that your house is not an asset. 10 years later, in 2007, when subprime borrowers began to default on their subprime, say subprime, pause on the clock, subprime,
Subprime.
subprime,
Subprime.
subprime, a collection of supreme leaders. 9. Referring to credit or loan agreements for borrowers with a poor credit history, typically having unaffordable conditions such as high interest. Teil des US-amerikanischen Kreditmarktes, der Kunden mit eingeschränkter Bonität Darlehen gewährt. Okay. Began to default on their subprime mortgages. The world's real estate bubble burst and millions of homeowners found out the truth in the lesson the hard way. Their house was not an asset. The house was not an asset. House is not an asset. Houses are not assets. House was not an asset. Das Haus war kein Vermögenswert. Okay, das war was Neues. The real problem. The real problem. Most people do not know that the real estate crash was not really a real estate crash. Poor people did not cause the real estate crash. The rich caused the real estate crash. The rich created financially engineered products known as derivatives, 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 Ableitung. Something that is based on another source. Okay. Products Warren Buffett has called weapons of mass financial destruction. When the financial weapon of mass destruction started to explode, the real estate market crashed and poor subprime borrowers were blamed. The real problem. Most people do not know that the real estate crash was not really a real estate crash. Poor people did not cause the real estate crash. The rich caused the real estate crash. The rich created financial engineered products known as derivatives. Products Warren Buffett has called weapons of mass financial destruction. When the financial weapons of mass destruction started to explode, the real estate market crashed and poor subprime borrowers are blamed. In 2007, there were an estimated $700 trillion in financial derivatives. Today, it is estimated there are $1.2 quadrillion in financial derivatives. In other words, the real problem has gotten bigger, not better. Rich Dad lesson. Why the rich pay less in taxes? 20 years ago, Rich Dad lesson. Why the rich pays less in taxes? Das brauchen wir auf jeden Fall, oder? Das ist wichtig. Why the rich pay less taxes? 20 years ago, a few publishers criticized Rich Dad Poor Dad for disclosing how and why the rich pay less taxes. One stated that lesson was illegal. 10 years later, in 2007, President Barack Obama was running for re-election against former Governor Mitt Romney. Fuck that nigga. When it was disclosed when it was disclosed that President Obama paid approximately 30% of his income in taxes and Governor Romney paid less than 13% in taxes, Mitt Romney began the downhill slide that would cost him the election. Were Taxes again were focal points in the 2016 US presidential election. Rather than find out how people like Mitt Romney and President Donald Trump pay less in taxes legally, the poor and middle class get angry. While President Trump promises to reduce taxes for the poor and middle class, the reality is the rich will always pay less in taxes. The reason the rich pay less in taxes goes back to Rich Dad's lesson number one. The rich don't work for money. As long as person works for money, they will pay taxes. The rich don't work for money. As long as a person works for money, they will pay taxes. Alles schön und gut, aber Bro, explain me. Wie? Even when presidential candidate Hillary Clinton was promising to raise the taxes on the rich, she was promising to raise the taxes on those with high incomes, people like doctors, actors, and lawyers, not the real rich. 20 years ago, although Rich Dad Poor Dad was not an immediate success like the Beatles SGT Peppers album, Rich Dad Poor Dad did make the New York Times bestseller. Rich Dad Poor Dad did make the New York Times bestseller list by the year 2000 and stayed on that list for nearly 7 years. Also in the year 2000, Oprah Winfrey called I was on Oprah for the entire hour, and as they say, the rest is history. Rich Dad Poor Dad has become the number one Rich Dad Poor Dad has become the number one personal finance book in history, with sales of the Rich Dad series of books estimated at nearly 400 million copies worldwide. Was there really a rich dad? Was there really a rich dad? Fragezeichen, question mark. Millions have asked, was there really a rich dad? To answer that question, you can listen to Rich Dad's son, Mike, when he was a guest on the Rich Dad radio show. You can listen to the program by going to richdadradio.com. Der promotet einfach andere Sachen. Bro, zeig mal, wie ich mein Geld umgehen kann. Ne? Rich Dad Graduate School. Rich Dad Poor Dad was written as simply as possible so that almost everyone could understand my Rich Dad's lesson. For those who want to learn more, as part of the 20-year celebration, I wrote Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, What is Financial Educational Really? Why the Rich Are Getting Richer goes into greater, more specific detail on what Rich Dad really taught his son and me when it came to money and investing. Why the Rich Are Getting Richer is Rich Dad Poor Dad for graduate students. It's graduate school for rich dad students. A warning and an invitation. While I did my best to keep Why the rich are getting richer as simple as possible, what the rich really do is not easy or easy to explain. What the rich really do requires real financial education not taught in our schools. Das ist das Problem. Das ist ein Problem. Die Schule zeigt dir, wie du für jemanden arbeitest, aber die Schule sagt dir nicht, wie du deine Steuern selber zahlst, wie du selbstständig wirst. That's the problem. I suggest reading Rich Dad Poor Dad first, then if you want to learn more, Why the Rich Get Richer, maybe for you. Thank you for 20 great years To all the readers, past, present. Ach so, das war einfach nur ein Input. Tschüss, Bruder. Ich dachte, ich habe angefangen mit Buch. Jetzt fangen wir richtig an mit Buch. Seite 9, jetzt fangen wir an richtig mit Buch. Introduction, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Having two dads offered me the choice of contrasting points of view, one of a rich man and one of a poor man. I had two fathers, a rich one and a poor one. One was highly educated and intelligent. He had a PhD and completed 4 years of undergraduate work in less than 2 years. He then went on to Stanford University University of Chicago, and Northern University to do his advanced studies, all on full financial scholarship. The other father never finished the 8th grade. Both men were successful in their careers, working hard all their lives. Both earned substantial income, yet one always struggled financially. The other would become one of the richest men in Hawaii. One died leaving tens of millions of dollars to his family, charities, and his church. The other left bills to be paid when he died. Both men were strong, charismatic, and influential. Both men offered me advice, but they did not advise the same things that men believe strongly in education, but did not recommend the same course of study. If I had had only one dad, I would have had to accept or reject his advice. Having two dads offered me the choice of contrasting points of view, one of a rich man and one of a poor man. Instead of simply accepting or rejecting one or the instead of oh, ich bin nicht nett, Bruder. Oh, Bruder, ich muss auf jeden Fall lesen, Bro. Was? Instead of simply accepting or rejecting one or the other, I found myself thinking more, comparing, and then choosing for myself. The problem was that the rich man was not rich yet, and the poor man was not yet poor. Both were just starting out on their careers, and both were struggling with money and families, but they had very different points of views about money. For example, one dad will say the love of money is the root of all evil, the other will say the lack of money is the root of all evil. As a young boy, having two strong fathers both influencing me was difficult. I wanted to be a good son and listen, but the two fathers did not say the same thing. The contrast in their points of view, particularly about money, was so extreme that I grew curious and intrigued. Was ist das? Fasziniert. Wie spricht man das aus? Intrigued. Oh. But I grew curious and intrigued. I began to start thinking for long periods of time about what each was saying. Much of my private time was spent reflecting, asking myself questions such as, why does he say that? And then asking the same questions of the other dad's statement. It would have been much easier to simply say, yeah, he's right, I agree with that, or simply reject the point of view by saying, the old man doesn't know what he's talking about. Instead, having two dads whom I loved forced me to think and ultimately choose a way of thinking for myself. As a process, choosing for myself turned out to be much more valuable in the long run than simply accepting or rejecting a single point of view. One of the reasons the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the middle class struggles in debt is the subject of money is taught at home, not in school. Most of us learn about money from our parents. So what can poor parents tell their child about money? Nichts. They simply say stay in school and study hard. The child may graduate with excellent grades, but with a poor personal financial programming and mindset. Yeah. Sadly, money is not taught in schools. Schools focus on scholastic and professional skills. Scholastic. Schol, schol,
Scholastisch. Scholastic.
scholastic. Hmm. Between them a little more on scholastic exercise, scholastic achievement. Boah, ich verstehe das nicht. Was? Of or concerning school of education. Scholastic and professional skills, but not on financial skills. This explains why the smart bankers, doctors, and accountants who earned excellent grades may struggle financially all of their lives. Our tragedy, national debt, is due in large parts to highly educated politicians and government officials making financial decisions with little or no training in the subject of money. Today, I often wonder what will happen when we have millions of people who need financial and medical assistance. They will be dependent upon their families or the government for financial support. What will happen when Medicare and Social Security runs out of money? How will a nation survive if teaching children about How will a nation survive if teaching children about money continues to be left to parents, most of whom will be or already are poor? Ich muss auf jeden Fall viel mehr lesen. Oder was? Oh, TikTok-Gehirn habe ich einfach no caps, geisteskrank. Okay, das war's auf jeden Fall. Rich Dad Poor Dad auf Englisch. Mm, Nehmt es mir nicht übel. Wir sehen uns beim nächsten Mal.